Hello, it's AmCat. Welcome to another episode of Sharpen the Axe. This is my YouTube channel, The Amateur Cat, on all things writing, and today we are going to break down a story. Are you excited? I am. Let's do it. So, today's story is a Brothers Grimm. Yes, I have broken down some Brothers Grimm stories in the past. I love breaking down a Brothers Grimm because they're a short story, they're well known, and so it's a lot of fun. And today's story is a very famous tale. One we all know. And it is, drumroll please, Rapunzel. The original story is actually over 200 years old. It was published in 1812, and it is very short. Yeah. And it was part of a collection of stories called Children's and Household Tales. Tuck that one away for later. This was written for kids. Now, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm are the duo who put together this compilation of many very famous fairy tales. Wilhelm was the primary editor. He actually spent multiple decades improving the story of Rapunzel. So following the original published version in 1812, he released a second version in 1819, and a final version was released in 1857. In the description below, you can see a link that shows you the very first version in 1812 next to the final version in 1857, which was compiled by the scholar D.L. Ashleman. And so you can read that for yourself, and I encourage you to do that. Now, more recently, this story has been adapted into the major motion picture Tangled, one of the big princess franchise in the Disney catalog, and a personal favorite. I'm going to read for you the original 1812 version of Rapunzel. Then I'm going to select 3 Save the Cat genres. I'm going to study them using this book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I love how Jessica Brody, the author, really unpacks the genres, and I'm going to look at this story through the lens of several. Then I'm going to come back in a separate video for part 2, where I unpack the story through the lens of the genre that I ultimately choose. You ready for a story? Let's do it. Rapunzel, first edition, 1812. Once upon a time, there was a man and a woman who had long wished for a child but had never received one. Finally, however, the woman came to be with child. Through the small rear window of these people's house, they could see into a fairy's garden that was filled with flowers and herbs of all kinds. No one dared enter this garden. One day the woman was standing at this window when she saw the most beautiful Rapunzel in a bed. She longed for some, but not knowing how to get any, became miserably ill. Her husband was frightened. He asked her why she was doing so poorly. "Oh, if I do not get some Rapunzel from the garden behind our house, I shall surely die," she said. The man, who loved her dearly, decided to get her some, whatever the cost. One evening he climbed over the high wall, hastily dug up a handful of Rapunzel, and took it to his wife. She immediately made a salad from it, which she devoured greedily. It tasted so very good to her that by the next day her desire for more had grown threefold. The man saw that there would be no peace, so once again he climbed into the garden. To his horror, the fairy was standing there. She scolded him fiercely for daring to enter and steal from her garden. He excused himself as best he could with his wife's pregnancy and how it would be dangerous to deny her anything. Finally, the fairy spoke. "I will accept your excuse and even allow you to take as much Rapunzel as you want, if you will give me the child that your wife is now carrying." In his fear, the man agreed to everything. When the woman gave birth, the fairy appeared, named the little girl Rapunzel, and took her away. This Rapunzel became the most beautiful child under the sun, but when she was 12 years old, the fairy locked her in a high tower that had neither a door nor a stairway, but only a tiny little window at the very top. When the fairy wanted to enter, she stood below and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had splendid hair, as fine as spun gold. When the fairy called out, she untied it, wound it around a window hook, let it fall 20 yards to the ground, and then the fairy climbed up it. One day, a young prince came through the forest where the tower stood. He saw the beautiful Rapunzel standing at her window, heard her sing with her sweet voice, and fell in love with her. Because there was no door in the tower, no ladder was tall enough to reach her, he fell into despair. He came to the forest every day until once he saw the fairy, who said, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And then he knew which ladder would get him into the tower. He remembered the words that he would have to speak, and the next day, as soon as it was dark, he went to the tower and called upward, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." She let her hair fall. He tied himself to it and was pulled up. At first, Rapunzel was frightened. But she soon came to like the young king so well that she arranged for him to come every day and be pulled up. Thus, they lived in joy and pleasure for a long time. The fairy did not discover what was happening until one day Rapunzel said to her, "Frau Gothel, tell me why it is that my clothes are too tight. They no longer fit me." "You godless child," said the fairy, "what am I hearing from you?" She immediately saw how she had been deceived and was terribly angry. She took Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wrapped it a few times around her left hand, grasped a pair of scissors with her right hand, and snip, snip, cut it off. Then she sent Rapunzel into the wilderness, where she suffered greatly and where, after a time, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. On the evening of the same day that she sent Rapunzel away, the fairy tied the cut-off hair to the hook at the top of the tower, and when the prince called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let down the hair. The prince was startled to find the fairy instead of his beloved Rapunzel. "Do you know what, evil one?" cried the angry fairy. "You have lost Rapunzel forever." The prince, in his despair, threw himself from the tower. He escaped with his life, but he lost his eyesight in the fall. Sorrowfully, he wandered about the forest, weeping and eating nothing but grass and roots. Some years later, he happened into the wilderness where Rapunzel lived miserably with her children. He thought that her voice was familiar. She recognized him instantly as well and threw her arms around his neck. 2 of her tears fell into his eyes, and they became clear once again, and he could see as well as before. Okay, well, there was a nice little treat for the kiddies. Any questions, little ones? My, how the times have changed. Let's talk Save the Cat genres. There's 3 that come to mind and that I can't wait to study. When I think of a Brothers Grimm, monster comes to mind. That's right. And this story has some of the potential characteristics of a monster in the house. And that's the Save the Cat genre for a monster movie. And essential characteristics are the monster, this confined space, and a sin. And definitely we have an evil fairy, a high tower where somebody is locked away, and Dad may have committed a sin when he agreed to give an evil fairy his firstborn child. But we also might have an innocent hero on our hands. Rapunzel seems to have been thrust into a sudden event, put into a high tower and locked away. So that has some of the feeling of a dude with a problem. That genre has several essential characteristics: the innocent hero, the sudden event, and a life or death battle. And with Rapunzel, I feel like we've got some of the characteristics of that particular genre that could be at play. And it's very interesting how often the dude with the problem genre and the monster in the house go mano-a-mano, head to head. There's a lot of similarities about these 2 genres, but when you do the homework and you boil it down, there are some central qualities that are very different about these genres and define them quite distinctly. And then, of course, last, I'm going to have a look at the buddy love. Because, folks, we may have a love story on our hands. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to get busy studying. I'm going to be looking at this book. I'm going to study the 3 genres that I mentioned. By the way, I would love it if you would do this with me. So if you have this book or some of the others that break down the genres, you could even do some Google searches. pick some of the genres that you think this story might be. And I will see you on part 2 of this episode where I unpack the story in the genre that I chose. Happy studying, and I'll see you soon.